The pale golden light from the crystal chandeliers poured down into the grand lobby of the Regal Crown Hotel like a glittering waterfall. Everything there radiated opulence: the long red carpet, the glossy leather suitcases, the rhythmic tapping of high heels on marble floors. Guests came and went, clutching briefcases, their smiles thin and polite, as if they were actors in an elegant play. Amid that tableau, Amara Lewis was nothing more than a small shadow. A cart piled high with linens, worn-out rubber gloves, and a faded pale blue uniform. At 28, this black woman was long accustomed to bowing her head, avoiding eye contact, creeping as if she were invisible. For 6 years, the polished floors of this hotel had memorized her footsteps, but not a single person remembered the name Amara. "Your job is to clean. Don't dream." The voice of her manager, Sarah Miller, still echoed in her head, like a scar that would never fade. But that afternoon, fate placed in Amara's hands a trial she hadn't expected. The cheap phone in her pocket buzzed. Her heart skipped when she saw the caller ID, University of Amsterdam. 6 times she had applied for a master's scholarship, 6 times she had been rejected. This time, could it be the door to her dream opening? Amara glanced around. The lobby was crowded with guests, and Miller, her manager, was standing not far away, chatting with a few VIPs. The hotel's rules were clear. Housekeeping staff were never allowed to answer personal calls during work hours, especially in public areas. But this chance, Amara knew, she could not miss. She stepped back, pressing herself against a marble column, trembling fingers pressing the answer button. "Zeg het maar," a man's voice came fluently in Dutch. Amara closed her eyes, then replied in the language that had once been her pride. "Dit is Amara Lewis. Dank u wel voor uw telefoontje." The words flowed out as naturally as breath. Her accent was so precise that even a group of Dutch guests walking by turned their heads, startled. Amara nearly forgot where she was. The conversation swept her into another world, about her application file, about a missing motivation letter, about the possibility of being accepted into the international program. She spoke in Dutch, weaving in bits of English, her eyes alight with hope. And then a heavy silence fell. Amara looked up, and her heart sank. Just a few steps away stood Jonathan Hayes, chairman of the Regal conglomerate, owner of the entire hotel chain, watching her with an unreadable expression. Beside him, Sarah Miller gaped, her eyes blazing with fury and contempt. Amara stammered, "Ik bel je later terug, dank u." Then she hung up. The air thickened. Miller stepped forward, hissing through her teeth. "Lewis, my office, now." The walk from the lobby to the administration wing had never felt so long. Pairs of eyes followed her, some with pity, some with ridicule. She caught whispers in the crowd. Who does she think she is? A maid showing off foreign words? Sounds like she's just pretending. Ridiculous. Amara bit her lip, swallowing every cruel word. In that moment, she remembered her very first job interview after graduation. The recruiter had looked straight at her curls and said, "Our clients probably wouldn't feel comfortable seeing someone like you in this position." Every sneer, every scornful glance had embedded itself deep in Amara's memory, but instead of screaming, she walked in silence. The office door slammed shut behind her. Sarah Miller pounced with accusations. "You know the rules, no phone calls during work, especially in the lobby." "And what was that gibberish? French?" Amara whispered. "Dutch?" "Whatever it was, Mr. Hayes just saw you, a cleaner, standing in the lobby, neglecting your duties to show off. You embarrassed this entire hotel." Amara wanted to fight back. She wanted to say that her white colleagues often answered calls, even laughed with their boyfriends, right at the front desk. But she knew, in Sarah Miller's eyes, that truth would never matter. The sentence was passed. For the next 3 months, Amara would be reassigned to clean the convention center bathrooms. The harshest, filthiest work no one wanted. "Consider yourself lucky I didn't fire you," Miller concluded, hurling a look of disdain. Amara stepped into the dim hallway, her fists clenched so tight her palms bled. In the cold air, she replayed the mocking laughter, the sneering voices. Her body felt ready to collapse, yet inside, a taut string pulled tight. One day, they will have to see her, not as a maid, but as the honest Amara Lewis. The office door closed behind her, but Sarah Miller's words still echoed in Amara's head, cutting into her heart like a blunt knife. The hotel lobby lit up again, filled once more with the laughter of wealthy guests, while Amara returned to her cart piled with dirty linens and bottles of cleaning solution. But today her hands trembled more than usual. She could feel all the eyes on her. Some colleagues passed by, trying not to look directly at her, but their lips curled ever so slightly. Some guests who had witnessed the scene earlier now looked at her as if she were a clown awkwardly trying on a costume far too big. "She thinks learning a few foreign words makes her special?" a white receptionist whispered to a co-worker. Exactly. If she were really that good, why would she be scrubbing floors? Amara heard every word, as clear as if they had shouted it. She lowered her head, pressed her lips together, and pushed her cart slowly toward the service elevator. But inside, resentment surged like a raging tide. Her tiny rented room was on the third floor of an old apartment block, 40 minutes by bus from the hotel. The cramped space, with peeling walls, was shared with two young nurses who worked night shifts at the hospital. By the time Amara returned, the clock already pointed to nearly midnight. She peeled off her uniform, steeped in the smell of bleach, and sat down heavily on her bed. In front of her was a stained wall where she hung the only thing of value she owned, her bachelor's degree in international linguistics. Next to it were 3 language certificates in wooden frames, dulled by years. For 6 years they had hung there, silent reminders of bitter truths. Amara reached out, brushing the dust on the glass. Countless times she had hoped she would step out of cleaning work and live true to her passion for languages. Countless times she had believed that effort would be seen, talent would be recognized. But time after time, the doors slammed shut. She remembered clearly her last interview when an HR director glanced at her file and then looked up. "We're truly impressed by your achievements, but our clients are accustomed to a different face. You understand what I mean, don't you?" Amara had forced a smile, nodded, and walked out. That day, the sky opened into a torrential downpour. That night, in her little room, Amara did not sob aloud. Her tears fell silently, dripping onto her calloused hands, scarred by bleach. Amid the distant hum of the city, she asked herself, was I wrong from the start to believe skin color could not decide a future? The phone on the table lit up. A message from her mother back home. "Have you eaten dinner yet? Don't overwork yourself. I always believe you'll find your way." Amara choked back a sob. Her mother had once been a maid in a modest hotel. That woman, too, had a college degree, yet was never recognized. All her life, she was known only as the black cleaning lady. Nothing more. And now Amara realized she was walking the very same path. In the dark, she whispered, "I will not let it end this way, Mama. One day they will have to see me differently." The next morning, Amara rose earlier than usual. She put on her worn uniform again, tied back her curls, and looked long into the mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but within them flickered something else, determination. When she entered the hotel, she saw Sarah Miller waiting, eyes sharp as knives. "Lewis, from today you're reassigned to the convention center restrooms. I hope you'll have enough space there to practice your Dutch." A few co-workers nearby burst into laughter. Amara pressed her lips tight, silently accepting the order. On her way down to the basement, she overheard 2 white service staff whispering. Well, she had it coming. Always acting smart, speaking all those languages. People like that make guests uncomfortable. Yeah, guests come to this hotel to feel superior, not to listen to a janitor show off her diplomas. Amara kept walking, but each word cut deeper into her memory. That afternoon, while scrubbing the vast convention center bathroom floor, the sounds of laughter and music drifted from the conference hall. Amara stopped, leaning on her mop, listening to conversations in English, French, Mandarin, and Dutch. Each word that slipped through the door cracks was like a shard of broken glass, reflecting a world she should have belonged to. A world she had studied for, dreamed of, and fought to enter, but which she could now only glimpse from behind these cold walls. Tears slid down her cheeks, mixing with the acrid smell of cleaning chemicals. In that moment, Amara realized it was her skin color that had always consigned her to the lower tier. She could speak 6 languages, yet to Miller and Blake, she was nothing more than a cleaner, a black woman with a mop. When night fell and she returned to her room, Amara sat by the narrow window, gazing at the faraway city lights. She pulled out an old notebook and opened the first page, where she had once written, "Goal: become an international linguistics specialist before 30. She laughed bitterly. With only 2 years left, she was still a maid, but in that laugh lay a silent vow. If I must prove it, I will prove it. If I must fight, I will fight. One day they will no longer call me invisible." The street lamp's glow spilled onto the notebook. The old handwriting trembled, but beneath it Amara wrote a new line, bold and firm. "I will not keep mopping for someone else's dream. It's time to step into my own." Monday mornings at the Regal Crown usually began with hurried sounds, the rolling of suitcase wheels on stone floors, the sharp click of polished shoes in quick rhythm, the soft greetings of reception staff. But that morning, for Amara Lewis, everything was different. She was scrubbing the stairwell near the conference wing when the intercom crackled and the head receptionist, Jennifer, spoke. "Employee Amara Lewis, please report to Human Resources on the 15th floor immediately." Amara froze. The 15th floor. That was where the executive offices and HR department were, territory she had never set foot in during her 6 years of work. Her heart pounded. One thought seized her mind. They're going to fire me. She quickly wiped her bleach-scented hands and smoothed her wrinkled uniform. Her petite figure looked out of place in the elevator among business people in pressed suits, carrying glossy leather briefcases. Not one of them looked at her. Her invisibility was familiar, but this time it suffocated her. The elevator doors slid open. HR was gleaming, with leather chairs and framed paintings on the walls, making Amara feel as though she had wandered into another world. The HR director invited her to sit, speaking evenly. "Mr. Hayes, the chairman wants to see you, right now." Amara's eyes widened. The chairman of Regal, the man she had only ever seen on the cover of Forbes or in reports about billion-dollar deals. Why would he summon a cleaner like her? She was led before a grand carved wooden door. The brass plaque read, "Jonathan Hayes, Chairman and CEO." The door opened and Amara stepped inside. The office was larger than the apartment she lived in. Glass walls revealed a sweeping view of the city, with morning sunlight pouring in, glinting off a massive mahogany desk. Behind it sat a man in his mid-40s, with neatly combed graying hair, cold blue eyes, waiting. "You are Amara Lewis." His voice was low, not loud, but heavy enough to compress the air in the room. "Yes, sir," Amara replied, her voice trembling. He opened a thick folder before him, turned a few pages, then looked up, eyes intent. "Dutch, French, Italian, Mandarin, am I missing anything?" Amara faltered, startled. "I also know some Japanese, sir." He raised an eyebrow slightly, then set down his pen. "Then explain to me why a graduate in international linguistics from Georgetown, fluent in 6 languages, is scrubbing toilets in my hotel." The question fell like a thunderclap. Amara froze. For a fleeting moment, she thought of lying, of saying it was because of rent or circumstance or any other excuse. But then all the years of rejection, the scornful looks, the cold rejection letters came flooding back. She drew in a deep breath and answered slowly. "In the past 6 years, I've submitted 47 applications for language-related positions in this hotel. I also requested 12 departmental transfers. Every single one was denied. The people who rejected me were manager Sarah Miller and operations director Thomas Blake." Jonathan Hayes sat in silence, his eyes fixed on her. He tapped his pen lightly against the desk. "Interesting. Just last month, Blake complained to me that the hotel lacked Mandarin-speaking staff to handle the Asia conference. And yet your file has been sitting right here." Amara bit her lip. His words confirmed what she had long suspected. It wasn't that she lacked ability, but that they had deliberately denied her the chance, because of her skin and her background. "Lewis," Jonathan continued, his tone dropping lower, "tomorrow we're hosting an important conference with Dutch and Chinese business delegations. I need someone to coordinate the languages, someone who understands both culture and nuance, and I want to assign that to you." Amara's head shot up, her eyes wide. "You mean me?" "Yes, starting today, you will temporarily serve as International Relations Coordinator for this event." Salary, $5,000 a week. She nearly dropped the bag in her hands. That figure was more than 3 months of cleaning wages combined. But more than the money, what choked her with emotion were 3 words: international relations. A position she had once dreamed of, once submitted dozens of applications for, begged to be considered for, now suddenly laid before her. In an instant, years of pent-up emotion flooded through her. Amara saw her mother's face in her mind, remembered the nights scrubbing floors, the times co-workers had laughed at her. She steadied herself, whispering, "Sir, why me? There must be plenty of other candidates out there." Jonathan Hayes leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharp as blades but glinting with resolve. "Because I heard you speak Dutch like a native. Because your file proves you're the only one here with true ability. And because I want to know why, in 6 years, my company will let a talent like you mop floors." The air went still. Amara felt the whole world shifting around her. From the stench of bathroom floors, she now stood at the threshold of something that could change everything. But in Jonathan's eyes, she also sensed something else. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a test, and if she failed, she would be dragged back into the abyss, worse than before. Amara drew in a long breath, lifted her head, and nodded firmly. "I won't let you down." Jonathan gave a faint smile and closed the file. "Good, start immediately. And remember, you're not just representing me, you're representing all those people in this hotel who've always been looked down on." As she stepped out of the office, the new employee badge around her neck gleamed in the morning light. For the first time in years, she was no longer the invisible maid. But Amara also knew, from this moment on, every eye would be on her, and not all of them would be hoping she succeeded. The new employee badge glimmered on Amara's chest like a strange milestone. As she stepped out of the chairman's office, she felt as if she were living inside a dream, a fragile dream that could shatter at any moment. The elevator carried her back down to the ground floor. When the doors slid open, her former co-workers all looked up at once. They saw the new badge, saw that Amara was no longer in her faded blue uniform, but in a minimalist suit issued by HR. Not a word was spoken, yet the looks of scorn, suspicion, and contempt cut as sharply as knives. Sarah Miller, Amara's direct manager, marched forward, her voice sharp as steel. "Miss Lewis, that badge, where did you get it?" Amara drew a deep breath, keeping her tone steady. "This is a direct order from Chairman Hayes. I have been temporarily appointed International Relations Coordinator for tomorrow's conference." Miller's eyes widened, her face paling. "Impossible. You're not qualified." Amara lifted her head, her eyes blazing, her voice not loud but clear as glass. "I hold a degree in international linguistics from Georgetown. I am fluent in 6 languages, including Dutch and Mandarin, the 2 most critical for this conference. And my resume has been in HR for 6 years. Perhaps you forgot." The lobby froze. Staff glanced at one another, stifling laughter, but everyone saw Sarah Miller involuntarily step back. Amara didn't linger. She walked straight toward the preparation room. That afternoon, she was handed a thick stack of translation documents for the event. Welcome speeches, signage, and preliminary contracts between Regal Crown and its Asian partners. The small office reeked of fresh ink and paper, the cold fluorescent lights pressed against her tired eyes. She began to read. After only a few pages, Amara spotted serious errors. In the Mandarin introduction, the phrase long-term cooperation had been rendered as a contract that drags on endlessly, a crude choice of words that could make Chinese partners feel the company was forcing them. In another section, the word respect had been translated as endurance, implying submission. Tiny details, but in diplomacy, such mistakes could be disastrous. Amara shuddered. If these documents were used tomorrow, the entire conference could collapse into humiliation, costing tens of millions of dollars. She bent over the papers, correcting line by line, her eyes burning with determination. Every stroke of her red pen slashed through the incompetence and negligence of those who had dismissed her for years. As she was reviewing the final pages, a familiar low voice came from the doorway. "What have you found?" Amara looked up. Jonathan Hayes stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold but tinged with curiosity. "Sir," Amara replied evenly, these translations could deeply offend our partners. This isn't just a matter of language, it's a distortion of culture. She handed him the contract, now covered in red markings. Jonathan scanned it, then slowly nodded. Thomas Blake assured me he hired the best experts. They cost us more than $50,000 for this set. Amara answered without hesitation. He hired people unqualified for the task. Whoever translated these had no understanding of the diplomatic context. If these are presented tomorrow, the Dutch and Chinese delegates will see it as an insult. A flash of anger flickered in Hayes's eyes, but his voice remained calm. And you can correct all of this tonight. Amara gripped her pen tightly, nodding. Yes, I'll work until it's perfect. Jonathan studied her for a long moment before turning away. At the door, he spoke softly, but firmly enough for her to hear. Don't let them break you, Lewis. Tomorrow, this entire hotel will be watching you. Midnight. The small prep room was lit only by a yellow lamp and the steady scratching of pen on paper. Amara labored on, her eyes bloodshot, her hands aching. At times, she heard the jeers of her co-workers echo in her memory. The rejections, the recruiter's cold refusals. Each time, her pen pressed harder, strokes fiercer, more resolute. Outside the glass window, the city still blazed with light, but for Amara the world had narrowed to these words on paper. She knew with piercing clarity this was her one chance. If she failed, she would return to the mob, carrying their laughter on her back. But if she succeeded, perhaps a new door would truly open. Near dawn, Amara completed the final translation. She printed the pages, stacked them neatly, then collapsed into her chair, eyes closing in exhaustion. She was drained, but inside her stirred a quiet relief she hadn't felt in years. When she awoke, morning light was spilling across the room. On the desk lay the fresh stack of documents, crisp and flawless, every page meticulously revised. Amara picked them up, her hands trembling. Through the fatigue, a faint smile touched her lips. For the first time in years, she felt she was no longer invisible. And tomorrow, the whole world would see it too. That morning, the grand lobby of the Regal Crown Hotel gleamed like a stage. Flags of many nations lined the entrance. Delegations of Dutch and Chinese business people stepped out of limousines, dressed in immaculate suits, their leather briefcases polished to a shine. Camera flashes burst like fireworks. The air was charged with solemnity, tinged with competition. Amara Lewis stood inside, clad in a simple black suit provided by HR. On her chest, the new badge read, International Relations Coordinator. Yet beneath the glittering lights, her heart pounded wildly. Every step felt like stone. She knew well that, in the eyes of most colleagues, she was still just the lucky maid. Sarah Miller stood nearby, arms crossed, her cold gaze drilling into Amara as if to remind her, slip once, and it all goes back to the way it was. But Amara did not bow her head. She lifted it, drew in a deep breath, and walked into the hall. The conference room buzzed with conversation. People spoke of multi-million-dollar deals, of cross-continental ventures, and then, the moment Amara said, the room fell silent. Welcome by Regal Crown, dames and heren. Her Dutch rang out, pure, fluid, like that of a native. Several Dutch business people blinked in surprise, then broke into delighted smiles. Immediately, she switched into Mandarin, her greeting crisp, melodic, flawless enough to make the Chinese delegates nod in respect, their eyes lighting with admiration. Another silence filled the hall, but this time it was one of awe. At the back row, Jonathan Hayes allowed himself a faint smile. He said nothing, only observed. Meanwhile, Sarah Miller and Thomas Blake both paled. They knew. If Amara excelled here, every excuse they had wielded for 6 years, not suitable, would collapse. All morning, Amara flowed like a river between languages. She translated intricate negotiations into Dutch, then turned and explained them with subtlety in Mandarin. She translated not only words but cultures, softening stiff phrases, removing terms that could offend, weaving in metaphors that made delegates chuckle and nod. A memorable moment came when a Chinese businessman hesitated over a clause. With graceful tact, Amara invoked an old idiom, Tongzhou Gongji, to sail in the same boat. The entire delegation broke into laughter, the air lightened, and the negotiation moved forward smoothly. Outside the doors, hotel staff peeked in. Some were stunned, some whispered, "Is that really her? The maid who always kept her head down, scrubbing floors. My God, she speaks as though she were born to stand here." During the break, Thomas Blake approached, forcing a smile. "Miss Lewis, I must say, I'm impressed. Perhaps Miller underestimated you." Amara tilted her head slightly, her voice calm. "In truth, my file already showed these skills, but for 6 years it was never once looked at." The words were gentle, but they pierced straight through. Blake flinched, then forced a laugh and slipped away. From afar, Jonathan Hayes noticed everything. Blake's evasive eyes, Amara's steady composure. He knew what was unfolding was only the visible tip of a much larger truth. That afternoon, the Dutch delegates raised concerns over a clause in the service contract. They demanded a more explicit commitment. Blake quickly presented a document translated by his niece. Amara's eyes tightened. She saw immediately that the same errors remained, only patched clumsily. If used, the entire agreement could collapse. The room waited. Blake smiled confidently, sliding the document forward. But before he could say more, Amara raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said in Dutch. "This translation contains a phrase that could cause serious misunderstanding. I recommend using the revised version." She offered the document she had stayed up all night to prepare. The delegates flipped through it, their eyes brightened, heads nodding with approval. One leaned toward another, murmuring in Dutch, "She doesn't just know the language. She understands us." Blake sat frozen, his smile stiff. Sarah Miller gripped the arm of her chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. The conference ended in a ripple of gentle but genuine applause. A preliminary agreement was signed, securing Regal Crown a significant step forward. And at the center of it all stood Amara, the young black woman once dismissed as just a maid, now surrounded by international partners, shaking hands, smiling, addressed with full respect. Miss Lewis. In Amara's shining eyes there was pride, there was the weight of years of stifled pain, and there was also a whisper carried silently to her mother, "I did it. This time they have to see me for who I truly am." That evening, as the hall emptied, Jonathan Hayes approached her. He did not speak at length. He placed a hand on the documents she had corrected and gave a firm nod. "Today you saved this hotel." Amara looked up, her eyes glistening but steady. Deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Night fell, and the grand hall of Regal Crown sank into stillness. Yet in the hidden corners of power, undercurrents began to rise. Thomas Blake sat in his private office, his face flushed with rage. That morning, he had watched Amara eclipse every plan. She, a black cleaning woman, had dared to correct his niece's work in front of international business people. This humiliation, Blake could not swallow. "She cannot be allowed to survive this," he muttered, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "If she rises any higher, everything will come undone." Sarah Miller entered, her face twisted with resentment even sharper than Blake's. "Do you see it? All day they looked at her like a star. They've forgotten what she is, just a maid." Blake's voice was a growl. "Then we'll remind them. And this time, I'll make sure she doesn't get back up." The next morning, Amara arrived at the hall early. She wanted to double-check every document before the next round of negotiations, but when she opened the file on the table, her heart seized. The translations she had stayed up all night to revise were gone. In their place lay the old versions, full of glaring errors, freshly printed, their covers stamped boldly, official copy, approved by Operations Director Thomas Blake. Amara drew in a sharp breath, her hands trembling from the force of her grip. She knew instantly what this was, not merely sabotage, but a trap. If she protested, they would accuse her of defying protocol, of insubordination. But if she stayed silent, the conference would collapse, and all the blame would fall on her. Footsteps echoed. Sarah Miller appeared in the doorway, her lips curled in a triumphant smile. "Good morning, Miss Lewis. I see the new documents are ready. Don't worry, today you only need to smile and translate exactly what's there. You don't want to lose your position this quickly, do you?" Amara turned, her eyes ablaze, though her voice remained calm. "Do you think I'm afraid, Miller?" Sarah shrugged. "I think you're smart, and smart people know when to stay quiet." When the conference began, Blake strode out with pomp, the stack of red-stamped documents in his hand. He delivered a booming speech, praising the meticulous preparation, then distributed the copies to the delegates. Amara stood behind, her heart hammering. She watched as faces bent over the pages, brows furrowing in confusion. A Chinese delegate whispered to his colleague, his tone heavy with suspicion. At the head of the table, the Dutch delegates frowned, flipping the pages back and forth. If this went on, everything would collapse. Amara drew a deep, steady breath. She stepped forward, her voice ringing clear across the hall. "Excuse me, before we go any further, the documents you hold contain serious mistranslations. If not corrected, they could lead to irreparable misunderstandings." The room went utterly silent. Blake spun around, his voice a snarl. "Lewis, what the hell do you think you're doing? I approved these translations." Amara met his eyes without flinching. "That is precisely why I must speak. If you truly care about this hotel's honor, you'll let me present the truth." From the back row, Jonathan Hayes rose, his eyes like ice. "Very well, Miss Lewis, do you have proof?" Amara nodded, reaching into her bag. She produced a USB drive and the copies she had edited the night before. The projector lit up, the errors glaring on the big screen. Amara read each line aloud, then offered the proper wording. A Dutch businessman laughed in disbelief, shaking his head. "Incredible. Had we been given the old version, we would have understood it to mean Regal Crown considers our partnership a burdensome chain." A Chinese delegate stood, his voice firm, sharp. "And this phrase, if left unchanged, tells us Regal Crown sees Chinese partners as something to endure, not respect. That is a blatant insult." Blake's face drained of all color. Sarah Miller lowered her gaze, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Amara stood tall, her voice steady, unwavering. "Gentlemen, this is the corrected version. I spent the entire night ensuring its accuracy, not only linguistically, but culturally. Regal Crown seeks cooperation, not offense." The whispers turned into scattered applause. Several delegates moved closer, nodding with approval. Jonathan Hayes stepped to the podium, holding the faulty documents in his hand. He cast a glance at Blake before speaking slowly, his voice resonant. "Instead of hiring true experts, we spent tens of thousands of dollars on a disgrace. If not for Miss Lewis, Regal Crown would have been humiliated before the world today." The room was still. Blake, sweating, forced a weak smile. Perhaps there was some oversight. But Jonathan cut him off, his tone like steel. "There was no oversight. This was dishonesty. And I want to know, Blake, who produced these translations? And why were they called experts?" Blake was speechless. His eyes darted towards Sarah Miller, but she too was trembling, unable to speak. Amara knew then. The real storm had only just begun, but this time she was no longer alone. She had stood up, and the entire hall had witnessed it. That afternoon, after the international guests had left temporarily, Amara sat alone in the empty conference room. She exhaled deeply, staring at the corrected documents. It wasn't over. Blake and Miller would not let this go easily. Yet inside her, there was a strange, liberating calm. For years, she had stayed silent to keep her job, but today, for the first time, she had faced them. She had spoken the truth. And in that moment, she understood. Her true strength was not only in her languages, but in her courage to use her voice. The atmosphere in the conference room after Amara revealed her evidence was like a still lake struck by a heavy stone. Ripples of shock spread swiftly. Every pair of eyes, business people, managers, hotel staff, fixed on one man, Thomas Blake. Jonathan Hayes still stood, his hand gripping the stack of faulty translations. His voice rolled out slowly, heavy with gravity. "Thomas, do you care to explain? Why did Regal Crown pay over $50,000 for this translation? And why did a cleaning staff member have to correct the mistakes of our entire executive team?" Blake wiped his brow, forcing a crooked smile. "Mr. Hayes, I believe this was merely an oversight in the review process. The translation company we hired guaranteed." Amara stepped forward, cutting him off. Excuse me. That translation company belongs to Mr. Blake's niece." The room erupted. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Several Dutch business people frowned deeply, whispering in their native tongue. A Chinese delegate tapped his pen against the table, his eyes blazing with indignation. Jonathan snapped his head toward Blake, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Is that true?" Blake stammered. "That was only a coincidence. My niece has a certification." Amara calmly pulled a file from her bag, opened it, and handed it to Jonathan. "I verified with Peking University. Her certificate is fraudulent. Her Mandarin skills do not reach even the basic level, let alone the standards of diplomatic translation." The murmurs fell silent at once. The air grew so dense that one could hear Blake's labored breathing. Jonathan flipped rapidly through the papers, his expression darkening with each page. Then he slammed the file onto the table, his voice thunderous. "What is the meaning of this, Thomas? You colluded to siphon company funds, and worse, you excluded capable employees simply because of the color of their skin." Blake stammered, I only wanted to help my family. As for race, that was Miller. She managed recruitment." Sarah Miller jolted, her face ashen. "No, Mr. Hayes, I only followed hiring policies. But Amara refused to let her escape. Her voice rang out, steady and strong. "For 6 years, I submitted 47 applications. Every single one was rejected. And I am not the only case. Other employees of color, men and women with degrees, with experience, were all dismissed. Meanwhile, less qualified white employees were promoted. This is not an oversight. This is a system." Jonathan turned to the HR director, who had just rushed in with a stack of records. She placed them on the table, her voice trembling. "Mr. Hayes, I reviewed 5 years of hiring data. It shows that candidates of color were 3 times more likely to be rejected than white applicants, even when qualifications were equal or superior. In many cases, the final decision came from Mr. Blake and Mrs. Miller." The entire room froze. International delegates exchanged glances, their faces etched with outrage. Jonathan Hayes closed the file slowly, then fixed his eyes on Blake. "You betrayed my trust. Worse, you betrayed the very people working here. Do you think I will stand by and watch this company become a place of prejudice, corruption, and deceit?" Blake flushed crimson, but this time no words came to his defense. Amara stood silently, her heart surging. 6 years of humiliation, 6 years of doors slammed shut. Now the truth had broken into the light. She didn't need to scream, didn't need to argue. Her evidence and her composure were enough to shake the system. Jonathan's gaze swept the room. His voice rang clear, weighty as a verdict. "I will not allow people like this to continue running Regal Crown. This very afternoon, the board of directors will convene in emergency session, and before every employee, we will reveal the truth." Blake clenched his fists, his eyes flashing hatred. He glared at Amara as though to devour her, yet no words left his lips. Sarah Miller sank into her chair, her face ghostly pale, whispering weakly, "No, this can't be happening." Amara drew in a long, steady breath. In that moment, her heart felt lighter than it ever had. For the first time, she no longer had to fight to prove she existed. The truth had spoken for her. And she knew, from this moment on, nothing could close the door that had finally opened. That afternoon, the entire 12th floor of Regal Crown was mobilized for a meeting without precedent. From low-level supervisors to department heads to branch directors, everyone had been summoned urgently. News leaked quickly, and whispers spread. There had been a major scandal, and Chairman Jonathan Hayes himself would preside. Inside the grand hall, hundreds of eyes were fixed on the stage. In the front row, the Dutch and Chinese business delegations remained, determined to witness firsthand what was happening inside the corporation they were preparing to sign with. Sarah Miller sat huddled in a corner, her hands clenched together, sweat streaming relentlessly. Thomas Blake tried to maintain composure, but his fingers drummed wildly on the table, betraying the panic within. The rear door opened softly. Jonathan Hayes entered, not flanked by his usual executives, but by Amara Lewis, dressed in a simple black suit, her curly hair neatly tied, her face calm. The entire hall gasped. A few voices whispered in disbelief. "Isn't that the cleaning woman? This can't be real. What's going on?" Jonathan stepped onto the podium, his voice echoing, each word deliberate, like hammers striking stone. "Ladies and gentlemen, today I must confess a painful truth. For many years, Regal Crown has harbored a system of organized discrimination and corruption. It has not only blocked the opportunities of those deserving, but has cost this company millions of dollars. The room erupted in shock. Jonathan raised his hand, and behind him the giant screen lit up. Charts appeared, cold and undeniable. Percentages of employees of color denied promotion, qualified applications discarded, contracts funneled to a sham translation company owned by Blake's niece. Each number, each graph was a blade of truth. Jonathan's voice lowered, heavy with gravity. While true talent was cast aside, we squandered tens of thousands of dollars on worthless translations. And had it not been for this woman, Miss Amara Lewis, Regal Crown would have suffered global humiliation this very week. He turned toward Amara, giving a solemn nod. All eyes shifted to her. Amara stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. She drew in a breath, then spoke, not loudly, but with clarity that carried to every corner of the hall. I submitted 47 applications. I requested 12 department transfers. Everyone rejected, not because I lacked ability, but because my skin was not the right color. I am not alone. Dozens, even hundreds of people in this hotel have silently borne the same injustice. A ripple of painful murmurs swept through the hall. In the back rows, housekeepers, dishwashers, and window cleaners sat with tears brimming in their eyes. They nodded, as if at last someone was voicing what had been locked inside them for years. Amara continued, "Today, I do not stand here to speak of my promotion. I stand here to prove this. Truth will always find its way, and Regal Crown can only rise if no one is forced into invisibility again." Her words silenced the hall. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of hearts beating. Then, from the back, a single applause rang out. A window cleaner rose to his feet, clapping fervently. Then the entire row of service staff followed. One by one, rows upon rows, the applause grew into a wave, thunderous and unstoppable, shaking the hall with its force. Jonathan raised his hand for quiet, then declared, "Effective immediately. Thomas Blake is dismissed and terminated for corruption and ethical violations. Sarah Miller is suspended indefinitely pending investigation. The entire recruitment system will be audited." And finally, he paused, his eyes locking firmly on Amara, his voice ringing with certainty. "It is my honor to introduce the new Director of International Relations, Amara Lewis." The hall erupted into a roar of applause, this time not forced, but joyous, triumphant. Tears streaked down the faces of longtime staff. They no longer saw Amara as the woman who cleaned their halls, but as the one who had stood up for them all. Blake collapsed into his chair, his face twisted in disgrace as two security officers approached. He tried to resist, but now he was only a broken shadow, dragged away from the hall. Sarah Miller buried her face in her hands, weeping, unable to meet a single gaze. Amara stood motionless, her eyes wet and red. She did not smile, nor did she gloat. In her heart, there was only a rare serenity, as though 6 years of dust had finally been washed clean. Jonathan closed with solemn weight. "Today is a day Regal Crown will never forget. And from this day forward, we will never again allow prejudice or discrimination to determine a person's future." Applause thundered like rolling storms, echoing long and loud, mingling with the proud, unyielding gaze of Amara Lewis. 6 months after the day Regal Crown's Grand Hall erupted with its historic reversal, the atmosphere within the company had changed beyond belief. Corridors once cold and indifferent now rang with laughter. At the reception desk, faces once dismissed now stood tall in crisp suits, confidently welcoming international guests in multiple languages. And at the center of that transformation was Amara Lewis. In her new office on the 30th floor, the gleaming nameplate read, "Amara Lewis, Director of International Relations and Diversity." The expansive glass windows opened onto the city skyline, but for Amara, the most incredible view wasn't out there. It was within the people she was determined to bring out of the shadows. Before the board of directors, she presented a plan titled Hidden Voices. Opening her laptop, she saw the screen lit up with data. Her voice was steady, yet brimming with power. "In 6 months, we have reviewed more than 2,000 neglected employee files. 147 outstanding cases were selected. Each is working far below their true capacity. and 83% of them are people of color, women, or immigrants. Images followed: a Haitian window cleaner fluent in 3 languages, a Mexican woman working in the kitchen but holding a finance degree, a Filipino night stock clerk who had once been a technology engineer. At the head of the table, Jonathan Hayes nodded slowly. Many board members sat in silence, their eyes a mix of astonishment and shame. Amara pressed on, her tone firm. For years, we buried talent under prejudice, but given opportunity, these people not only shine for themselves, they generate value many times over for the company. She clicked to the next slide. Charts showing outsourcing costs down by 78%, international client satisfaction up by 42%, record-breaking profits from new contracts. This is not just justice, Amara said, eyes unwavering. This is the future. Across Regal Crown hotels, hidden voices became a movement. Every manager was required to identify at least 3 employees with hidden potential, mentor them, and open doors for them. In New York, a Nigerian security guard was promoted to lead diplomatic liaison for his outstanding French. In Miami, a Cuban woman, long confined to janitorial work, was promoted to an assistant in finance after Amara discovered she held a degree in accounting. International guests began to notice the difference. They saw not only better service, but diversity, sincerity, and dignity in every smile. But for Amara, the most significant change happened in the least expected place. One late afternoon, stepping out of the elevator, she found a group of housekeepers waiting. Hesitant at first, a middle-aged woman stepped forward, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Miss Lewis. 6 years ago, I applied to work at the reception. They told me, clients aren't used to this skin color. I buried that dream forever. But last week I was transferred to the check-in desk, and today I welcomed a guest in Spanish, the language my mother taught me as a child." Amara clasped the woman's hands, her heart tightening. She saw her mother's face in those eyes, the woman who had been pushed aside all her life, never once called by a title she deserved. Meanwhile, those who had oppressed others paid the price. Sarah Miller, after investigation, was spared but demoted to laundry manager in a low-tier hotel. Each day, she walked past roaring washing machines, haunted by memories of the disdain she once hurled at Amara, now left only with bitterness. Thomas Blake was not so fortunate. After his dismissal, no major hotel dared hire him. The scandal had spread through the industry. Rumor had it he now worked night shifts at a roadside motel in Arizona. A man forgotten, stripped of the name that once carried weight at Regal Crown. On a Monday morning, Amara stood before cameras at a company-wide conference broadcast live across the system. She drew a breath, her eyes shining, though her voice was steady and low. "When I was a child, my mother worked as a maid in a hotel like this. She had a college degree, but was never given work worthy of her ability. She once told me, 'Amara, even if they try to make you invisible, you still have your own worth.'" The hall fell utterly silent. Silent tears slid down many faces. "My mother did not live to see this day, but I believe every mother who was once dismissed will understand this joy. We will never let the next generation live in that same shadow." Applause thundered. Jonathan Hayes rose, the first to step out of his seat, bowing his head before Amara. His gesture set off the entire hall. Hundreds rose together, clapping without end. That day, Hidden Voices was no longer just an internal program. It became a symbol. Newspapers published it, and television praised it. Other corporations began reaching out to Amara, asking how to build systems like hers. But for Amara, the most important thing was not fame nor her now 6-figure salary. It was the sight of faces that once bent low over mops, now lifted proudly in boardrooms. She knew true justice does not end with punishing the guilty. Justice is when every door is opened and held open for all. One autumn morning, golden sunlight stretched across the window of her 30th floor office at Regal Crown. Amara Lewis stood quietly, hands resting on the plaque that read Director of International Relations and Diversity. 6 months earlier, this place had been an unreachable dream. Now it was reality, but not only for her. Inside the boardroom, everyone was assembled. Before her sat the directors, rows of managers from every branch, and hundreds of employees watching online. This was the official unveiling of Hidden Voices, the program that had transformed everything. Amara stepped onto the podium, breathing deeply. She began with a gentle smile, but her voice rang deep and resonant. Someone once told me that faces like mine would never belong in this room. I believed it for a long time, until I realized our silence was the strongest chain. The room hung in silence. Eyes from every corner followed her every word. In 6 months, she continued, we have found hundreds of hidden voices. They once held mops, carried buckets, and worked overnight shifts. Now they are receptionists speaking 3 languages, assistant financiers, and technology engineers. They have proven talent that was never lacking, only opportunity and recognition. Behind her, the screen displayed images. The Haitian cleaner now guiding international guests, the Mexican cook presenting financial reports, the Filipino clerk delivering a tech project. Applause rose, not loud but profound, as though each person absorbed their words into their own hearts. Amara's eyes glistened. My mother was a maid her entire life. She held a degree, yet was never called by the title she deserved. Before she passed, she told me, Amara, you don't need their recognition, you only need to recognize yourself. But today, I want more than that. I want all of us, from managers to cleaners, to have the right to be recognized. For a long moment, no one breathed. Many eyes brimmed with tears. An elderly service worker in the back row rose first, clapping slowly. Then, as if ignited, the entire hall stood, applause crashing like waves. Jonathan Hayes stepped toward Amara, bowing his head. You have not only changed Regal Crown, you have changed us all, changed how we see justice. Amara smiled faintly. In that moment, she felt a circle close. From silent nights scrubbing floors to standing at the heart of power, opening doors for those once forgotten. The meeting ended, and Amara returned to her office. On her desk lay a small envelope. She opened it, a postcard from Amsterdam, with a letter from Professor Vanderholt, the same man who had once called her in Dutch. We want to invite you to join us as a visiting professor at the University of Applied Languages. Your story has become an inspiration to us. Amara clutched the postcard, her eyes shimmering. Softly, she whispered, as if to her mother, Mum, at last, I've opened the door you were never allowed to walk through. Outside the window, the city bathed in golden evening light. Amara knew her journey was far from over, but now she carried the strength to keep walking, not just for herself, but for hundreds, thousands who followed behind.